everyone, today on the plastic canvas we're painting the bases on the Priest of Dagon and the Cultists from Mansions of Madness. From the plastic canvas, and welcome to another, albeit very short, video in this Mansions of Madness miniature painting series. Just really quickly before I get into it, Mansions of Madness is a co-op exploration game where players take on the role of paranormal investigators. Depending on the scenario, you go into different locations to investigate some seemingly paranormal events to work out what's going on. And being a horror-based game, there needs to be some baddies to go up against, and here are two of those baddies. We have the Priest of Dagon and a Cultist, and there's a bunch of so there's only one of the Priest of Dagons, but there's a few of the Cultists, and I've got so four of them sitting here. They're all painted in the same way, if I can sort of hold them like that. Anyway, there we go. So there's them, and there is a fifth one which my wife has had a little bit of a go at painting. She grabbed one of them and painted them up in a different scheme, but that's how I've gone about painting them. So, seeing as I've been painting some of the other minis and been doing videos of them, and I've gotten up to the basing for them, I wanted to do the basing with these guys as well, just to catch them up to the same step, and so that they tie in thematically when they're out on the board. So for the creature looking minis, I've been doing an earthy, grassy sort of look with their bases, but with the human looking ones, I'm doing a cracked stone sort of effect with them. And so, yeah, I just wanted to paint the bases with these guys so that, yeah, when they're out on the board, they tie in thematically. And I figured it's pretty easy to hit record on the camera, so I might as well do a video of that so that, yeah, it's another video for you guys to watch. And then I can show you how I go about doing the base. But also, I can do a quick little rundown of how I went about painting these guys. So, it's a pretty simple process I went through for painting them. My starting point was that because the scenario that these guys come out in, at least the one that I've played so far, the Priest of Dagon is the main bad guy, and the Cultists are his sort of supporters, followers, whatever you want to call them. So straight off the bat, I wanted to have a colour scheme that tied them together, so it looked like that they belong together, but that the Priest of Dagon was set apart from the Cultist. So that was the starting point. So then I jumped online, as I normally do, had a look on just Google Images, just searched Mansions of Madness, Cultists. That is one thing that I recommend you do when you go to paint something, is have a look at what other people have done. Even if you do have artwork that shows what the mini should look like, sometimes other people have had really good ideas and done something that looks even better than what was in the artwork. And one thing that I'm not really thrilled with Mansions of Madness is the artwork for the characters. I mean, it's done well, it's done better than what I could do, but the colour schemes are very drab, lots of browns and greys and just all the colours of the depressing rainbow. If I bring in just this card here for the crawling one, you can see, it's well drawn, it looks great, but in terms of the colour scheme, with the amount of browns and greys that there are, I didn't want to have such a uniform look across the board when all the minis are out there, so I wanted to go down a colour scheme that add a little bit more visual interest than just browns and greys. I can't actually remember what's on the card for these guys. I can't get it out. It's in there, so I can't remember off the top of my head. But yes, I wanted to do something with a little bit more interest. So I jumped online, and one that sort of stood out a little bit was someone that had painted a green colour scheme to them. And I thought, well, it sort of makes sense, a green robe, that's not sort of too out there. But what I didn't want to do is paint the whole thing just straight green. That was going to be too uniform looking. I wanted to add a bit of an extra element to it. And I wanted to also play around with some wet blending a little bit. So I thought, well, maybe I could blend from one colour into another. And so I thought, well, I could work in the green by having the green start at the sort of the ends of the robe. So the bottom of the robe, the ends of the sleeves and the hood, and then blend that into black. And so that's what I did. So it's started with black in the middle, running around, and then it just blends out to green as you work out towards the edges of the mini. And when I wet blend, I usually blend the light colour into the darker colour, because I find the darker one overpowers the lighter one too much. And so blending the green into the black rather than the black into the green, so that, you know, the black wouldn't end up working all the way out to the end before, you know, the blend actually worked, could then feather that in and get that transition. And obviously working perpendicular to the direction of the blend, so the blend works from the middle to the end, so brush work goes that way to get that smooth transition. And then, so did that first. Then there's this sort of secondary part of the robe. Some people just paint it the same colour. I wanted to do it something different. And so what actually ended up taking, or what I ended up taking, was this colour here, which is a sort of red with a bit of grey mixed in, is the colour that my wife used for her robe. And I thought it looked really good, and green and red sort of go together. So I thought I'd have a go at doing that. So yeah, did the green and the red, and then the grey pinstripe. And then I did some OSL with the light coming off the staff there, and I did the same thing with the priest of Dagon there. And the way I just went about that was, so I wanted it to be a purple glow. That's the same, obviously the same colour there as well. Just started with, basically did a dry brush, purple on the whole area that I thought the light from the staff would actually hit, and then mixed in a little bit more white, and then painted the level that would get just a little bit more concentration from the light. So that wasn't painted as far, then added a bit more white, did it again, but painted a bit less, just where the next highest level of concentration would be, and then just kept doing that until I painted almost white, just where the highest level of concentration would be from the staff. And then so it sort of, you know, starts at purple and, you know, on each side there, and then it sort of blends up and down each side, and then the lightest point is at the top there. And I just did the same thing there with the priest of Dagon. So the colour scheme for the priest was just the flip of the cultists. So, but the only difference being that this is straight red. There's no grey mixed in there. Not sure if you can tell, it's slightly different. But yeah, so mostly red, but done the same thing. So black, and then wet blended into red at the end of the sleeves and the end of the robe, and then his hat is whatever that's called, as red, and then yeah, so that's the way I went about them. So the overall sort of concept was that they look like they belong together, but the priest of Dagon is set apart by the others, and then, you know, so them out on the board, if I can get them all to do something like that. So he stands out, and because the colour scheme ties them together, the cultists look like they belong with the priest. So, painting the bases. So as you can see, I've already primed the part of the base where I'll be doing the cracked stone effect, and I've done it in a sort of like a curvy sort of edge, so that the sort of illusion, well, hopefully the effect will be that it continues beyond the edge of where I've painted, rather than just having, like, you know, painting a square of it and then like a really defined edge. So what I'm doing with all of the ones that look like humans is just painting on a grelin earth. So the idea of this is that you paint it on really thick, and then as it dries, it cracks. And then you could leave it unpainted and it would look like cracked earth. But I'm then going to be going over with a base of grey and then wet blend in some blacks and whites to create a stony look. Now what I'm also going to add to that, because at least with the first scenario where these guys come out, it's out the back of the mansion, and there is like a stony path, and off memory, I haven't gone back to look at the actual tile, but off memory, there's some grass and maybe some moss or something like that growing on the tiles. So I'm going to work a little bit of green in as well, just to create a bit of a mossy, grassy kind of look. So I did the prime on the bases for each of them, and now I'm just going to go and paint the Agril and Earth on, and yeah, I've done a couple of minis with this by now. The earlier ones that I did, there were a couple of spots where I didn't put it on super thick, and what I have found with it is that definitely the thicker you put it on, the better the cracks are. So yeah, you don't want to put it on too thin. You want to get a good bit of thickness to it, to get some good cracks. But obviously, if you only want small cracks, you can play with the thickness. But I'm going to go pretty thick to get some good cracks. So yeah, so I'm just going to paint up the bases, and then leave that to dry, and then we'll come back after it's just giving the Agril and Earth a bit of a shake, and then there, come back after it's all dried, and then paint them up. Our 5 bases done, so they're just now going to have a bit of time to dry, and yeah, as they dry they'll crack up to, with it the way that it is, it'll look like dried cracked earth. But yeah, we'll come back when that's all done and paint them up to look like stone. Alright, so with the magic of video, our Agril and Earth coat has dried and cracked up nicely. So you can see there we've got a good cracked earth look going on for each of these guys. Now they've all cracked pretty much the same, but some of them have cracked just a touch more and also a little more evenly than others. So like for example these two here, just put them off to the side. You can see the one on the left here has some more consistently bigger cracks in it. And even see on this one there's a spot just on the corner there where it didn't crack at all. What would have actually been a good thing is if I kind of tracked which ones ended up with a bit of a thicker coat than others. One thing that would actually be pretty cool to do is do a test on whether it's just a bit of plastic or something like that, put a prime down first, and then just do like a really, really thin sort of stroke of the Agril and Earth, and then do one that's a little bit thicker, and work up to a really, really thick coat of it. Leave it for, you know, a bit of time to dry, and just see how the cracks compare to each other, because obviously not every time you're going to want, you know, the thickest cracks that you can get. Sometimes you might want smaller ones, sometimes you might want thicker ones, or even just on the same base you might want different degrees of cracking, and just having a bit of an idea of how thick you need to go as a starting base or as a starting point to get some level of crackage, I suppose, if that's a word, and then what point it's not worth going past where it doesn't actually make a difference. So like for this one here, if you can actually get, you know, sort of better cracks than that at all. But anyway, that's something for another day. So now I'm just going to paint these up to get our stone effect. So for this, I'm just going to use a grey base, just my cloudy grey, which is my only grey that I've got. That's going to be the base, and then I'll just be blending in some black and some white to create a bit of texture, and create a little bit of sort of shading as well, just to get a bit of contrast. So be focusing the whites on the actual tops of the cracks themselves, where they'll be sort of catching the light, and the blacks will be more in the lower spaces to create a little bit of shadow, but yeah, just to give a bit of texture and a bit of contrast. So it's just going to be going through the same process with each of them. So just that grey base, and then blend in some blacks and some whites to add some texture. So as I've been doing with the other ones so far, I'm just going to be sort of trying to focus a bit on getting as little paint as possible in between the cracks, because one of the things that helps give the effect of, you know, the cracks and the end stony effect is having that black from the base in between them, just to give that contrast. Anywhere that I need to, I will go back at the end and paint black in between them, but if I can avoid that as much as possible, then obviously that's a bit of a time save. So the way that I'll be painting, if I just grab a brush, I probably won't go that one, probably my size 4 here. This is one of my original brushes that I don't actually use for painting anymore, just keep around for things like this where it doesn't matter if the bristles get a little bit ruined. And rather than actually painting in a normal, you know, sort of stroking, I'll be more like tapping. And just by tapping the top, it'll keep the bristles out of those cracks. It won't actually force any of the paint down in there. But if any happens to go in, it's not the end of the world. I can go back and touch it up, but I will be trying to avoid the paint going in between them as much as possible, because that's obviously going to take away the black. But yeah, I'll do what I can. So I might start with the priest, and then work through the cultists, all doing the same process. And yeah, we'll get these looking stony to match in with the other ones that I've done. Alright, so what I've done so far with the bases has dried, but up until this point it's all been done through wet blending. So I started with the grey base and then blended in some blacks and some whites to add some different texture and a little bit of contrast, just picking out where more of those cracks were to make it look like light was hitting there. But with the sort of the inherent nature of wet blending is that it's in the name, the paints blend together. So it's hard to get really defined edges to things. So taking this one here, for example, you know, I've been able to paint the stones, or what I'm trying to make look like stones, in a lighter colour than where the stones aren't. But in reality, the edges of the stones are going to catch a bit more light than the whole surface itself. So I'm just going to go through now that this coat is dry and the paint that I put on now is not going to blend into this paint. I'm just going to go through now and just do some finishing touches where I can just actually pick out some of the edges without it blending in. And also I'm going to paint some black in between some of the cracks to really bring that contrast out a little bit more. But I'm not going to paint in between every single crack. It would just take way too long to do it to all 5 of these, but also by painting some black in between just some of the sections, like I might paint some black in between these cracks here, then I might come around and do these ones over here, and then just these ones over here. It's going to make them look like they're sticking up a little bit more, so it'll just add a little bit more texture and contrast. So yeah, so there'll be no blacks in the highlighting here. It's just going to be picking out some of the edges just to get a little bit more definition. I'll do that with each of them, and then go through and just pick out some of the sections, and then just with my insane detail brush just paint some black in between the cracks just to bring that contrast out a little bit more, and add a little bit more texture. Alright, so I'm just going to quickly stop there for a second. So if you're looking sort of straight down from the top, you can see just by picking out the edges of some of them and some of the bigger stones like that one there, for example, I painted the whole top of it in a lighter tone. It's just added a little bit more contrast. So yeah, I didn't touch up every single one of them, just picked out some of them, just to try and make them look like they're sticking up a little bit more, and then as I come back later on and do the black, it's going to really bring that contrast and texture out a little bit more. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that with each of them, paint the black, and then I'll come back when it's dry and do a varnish. And just quickly, to mix this up, I just took the same grey that I used as the base, just my cloudy grey, and I've just mixed in some white. That's literally all I've done just to create this lighter grey. go, so those finishing touches are, well, in terms of the just picking out the highlights a little bit more, is done for those bases. So now I'm just going to go through and, yeah, just paint some black in between some of the bigger cracks. Just to, yeah, bring out that contrast even more and make some of those sections look a little bit more raised than the parts that don't get any black in between. So there's the next step in the base is done. So I've just gone through and painted some black in between the cracks just to bring the contrast up more. So if I just grab like this one here, you can see where I've painted in between the cracks around like this section here, did a little bit through this section there, a little bit at the back there. It's just help them to like give the impression that they're sticking up a little bit more, add a little bit more texture. So yeah, so in terms of actual painting, I'm going to call these guys done. I'm happy with how those bases are looking. Obviously some of them, some of them cracked a little bit more or cracked a little bit better than others. I think this guy probably cracked a bit better than what that one did, but that adds an extra little element there in that they don't all look exactly the same. So now I'm going to do a matte varnish on them. In terms of the order that I painted them, I think this guy was first, and that one, and then that one. So I'll be varnishing in the same order so that the paint will be dry by now. Where I am, it's pretty warm today, so the paint's drying pretty quick. So the reason I'll be varnishing is just because the outermost exposed layer at the moment is the paint, which is not a hard wearing surface. Getting knocked in the box or general wear and tear from the game, the paint can chip off, whereas a varnish is made to be hard wearing, so it can take those knocks. I don't have any, that's my drying retarder. I don't have any reflective surfaces on any of these minis, so I'm going to be using, it's the only varnish that I've got, but I will be using matte varnish. Just as that dries, the minis will end up looking exactly the same as they do now. The only thing that I might do, if I had a gloss varnish, just a little jewel in the staff there that's glowing, I might do that as gloss just to make it look like it's reflecting, and the this sort of crystal ball thing, whatever it is at the top of the priest staff, I'd probably do that too to give it some reflection, but I don't have it, so I'm just going to leave it looking the way that it is. So with the first couple of minis that I did using the varnish, I just followed the advice from some videos that I watched on YouTube, where they all said don't bother watering it down, just paint with it straight from the bottle, and that seems to be working well so far. So yeah, it'll just be straight from the bottle. I've got a plastic palette, just going to be putting it into here. Only takes a couple of drops per mini, so I don't need too much of it. Just move them off to the side, just give it a bit of a shake. And then I would expect for one of these minis, probably something like that. That was sort of 2 to 3 drops. That'll do for one, so we'll just add a little bit more. And as I use that, I don't think that'll last, but as I use it, I'll then add some more just so that I don't waste any. And for this, I'm going to use one of my older brushes that I got in my first set. It's just a size number 4, and just because I'll just be going pretty quick over the mini with it, this is a good one to use that I've kept around. So for jobs where the bristles might not get looked after as much as just general painting, it's good to have them lying around. So I'll be using that one in a size 4, just being a bit bigger. It'll cover the mini pretty quick. And I have mentioned this in the other videos where I've used the varnish. I'll mention it again. With the first one that I varnished, which was Ghost, the first video in this series, there was a spot in some of the detail around the chains where the varnish settled a bit in some of those recesses, and I didn't notice it, and it dried with some opacity to it and a little bit of sort of reflectivity to it. So kind of like when doing a wash, just need to make sure, go back over it, check to make sure it hasn't pulled in any of the recesses. It's spread out really well, so thin layers, and then that way it will dry clear with no reflection, and then you don't lose the effect of just the paint, because yeah, I don't want anything to look glossy, so be making sure that there's hasn't pulled anywhere. Spread it out like a wash, and then she'll be all good. And yeah, Ghost is the only one that I had that issue with, so I was able to fix that from the second one on. So the varnish on our Cultist and Priest of Dagon is dry, and so that means these guys are done. So yeah, you can see from the look of them there, they look exactly the same as what they did before the varnish went on. Just looks like they've been painted, which is exactly sort of what that matte varnish is supposed to do. So now they've got that hard wearing surface on them, but yeah, no more reflection than what they had in the first place. So yeah, so they're ready now to join the box with the others and be used in the game. So thank you very, very much for spending some time watching this, albeit very, very short video of me doing the bases for these guys. Obviously, I'm trying to do videos where I paint minis from start to end without leaving any steps out, but because I painted the actual figures themselves before I started this channel, couldn't do that, but I thought, well, I might as well at least still hit record. It's pretty easy to do, and then, you know, it's another video of you seeing me paint up some of these guys, and you know, I'm sort of hoping with this technique that I'm doing with the bases for the human-looking minis in Mansions of Madness, that I'm getting a little bit better at creating this stone effect. You know, like, I think this is one that I picked out in the last part of the video, but, you know, really happy with how that looks there. So yeah, so just thematically ties all of them together. And yeah, just adds a little bit of context to them. So yeah, thanks very, very much for spending some time watching me, watching another one of my videos. I really do hope you've gotten something out of this, something that you can use in your own painting, or just at the very least, you've just enjoyed watching me paint. As usual, please do leave a comment down below, something that you liked about the video, something that you think can be improved, so that I can make these videos as good as possible. I need your feedback to help me do that. And so yeah, a bit of feedback would be appreciated. And yeah, if you enjoyed, please do hit the like and subscribe so that you can keep up to date with these videos as they keep coming out. So nothing else to say about these guys. So with that being said, this is Matt from the Plastic Canvas signing out. Happy painting, everyone. Cheers.